No, but for me, it's trying to understand this. Going back to traveling, I've done it 1 or 2 trips now. One to Denmark and one to France, right? Fairly recently, in 2022, I should say. And I just feel that feeling of being on an airport. Now it's something, we can be going anywhere, and you're in this sort of transition bubble. You can be whoever you want. That kind of feeling that goes with traveling. But of course, if you do it a lot, like you said, you get numb to that feeling, I think, and so that high goes away, and then it's more the fatigue that is left. I guess.
I agree. Totally.
Well, I guess it's still. I still, try. I think traveling is just a lot of nuisance and
no,
I prefer the comforts of my home.
And I love traveling as well. And for me, just going back up traveling, it's a big thing. But I realize also that it is nice and comfortable in your home and all that. So it's also, you can get it's that sort of, you get too much of it. So the whole value, the whole experience has been numbed down. So, but how was it now for you? I guess now when you went to Abu Dhabi was like the first time in how long time you did a proper, going on a flight for you?
Yeah, I mean, I did go to Italy
exactly.
during New Year, so that was like the first travel since COVID started.
In 2 years at least, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know, like that was more like I went to friends, they picked us up at the airport and everything. So this was the first real travel.
With a small adventure where you're in a new place, how does it work here and all this?
Exactly. And
it was just vacation, or what was the purpose of the trip?
It was vacation. So it was super nice. I think the Middle East is nice in so many ways.
What was your sort of key highlights of, were you staying in Dubai as well as Abu Dhabi?
Yes.
Where were your highlights on this trip?
I have to say that I was very impressed of the mosque.
The mosque?
That was amazing. I've been to the mosque.
Was the beauty of the actual buildings, or what was the impressive thing?
Exactly. I think it was very, to me, it was very similar to Taj Mahal in India. And I mean, that's supposed to be one of the world's most beautiful buildings. So I really think it was super beautiful.
And that was in Dubai or Abu Dhabi?
Abu Dhabi.
Abu Dhabi. Nice. And what was the weather like in Abu Dhabi? Was it
like Swedish summer, I would say.
Okay. 20 plus degrees or something?
Without the rain. Minus the rain.
So basically,
not the Swedish midsummer.
Going in Swedish winter time to Abu Dhabi is probably the most perfect time in some way. I mean, I guess kind of hot if you go Swedish summertime.
Exactly. Because I've also worked in the Middle East for a project. And it was very warm when it started coming close to summer. So I think it's totally a good time to go at this time of the year.
I think a lot of people have like the frustration that they want to travel now, and probably the airlines need also some way to survive the last couple of years. So nice to see that people are starting to travel.
Did you recognize if you think the airline prices had gone up or about the same? Did you have any view on that? Were you thinking about that?
Yes, I was. And I think that when I looked at tickets, in general, I think it seems like they've gone up.
Everybody has been sort of expecting that or thinking or, proclaiming that. And maybe not. I don't know. A little bit, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some vacation sounds like an awesome idea. Any other plans for traveling soon?
No. So this was what I was looking forwards to, and now it's gone.
But you can probably live on it for a while.
Yes.
Well, with that, very welcome here, Therese Svensson, data scientist and AI ethics specialist. Is that the right title? Or
solution specialist.
Solution specialist at IBM. Lots of interesting topics here to cover, but let's start with your background a bit. How would you describe yourself? Who is Therese Svensson?
So professionally or privately?
Start privately if you want.
Well, I did grow up in the north of Sweden. And
North, like which part?
Yeah, I grew up in Åre, or actually
of course.
Duved, close to
Oh.
Åre. So I moved away from there after high school. And then I moved to Stockholm, started
At what
working
age, approximately?
19,
19?
and started working a little bit to earn some money, and then I went out traveling. So
You went traveling as well.
You did the backpacking route at that point in time?
I did go to Australia to do some backpacking.
Yeah.
Australia.
Yeah, I lived there, and we had a lot of backpacking friends coming through when I lived there.
Oh, that's nice. Where did you live?
I first I did my university out there in the 90s. Then I stayed in Wollongong, it's south of Sydney, and then I've lived there in the mid 2000s. And then I lived in Manly, and the beach up from Manly, which is fresh water.
Ah,
This is Sydney.
so nice. I loved Australia.
Yeah.
What's the nice thing with Australia? What do you think the nicest things are with that country or the people or something?
Well, I think for me it was also that it was the first trip that I did on my own, like a long trip for a long time that I did on my own, and the freedom, like meeting all these new people, and obviously the temperature, because I really like not having to be cold. And everyone's so friendly, both like all the backpackers, but also the people in Australia. So I think the atmosphere. I would say.
But isn't it something very unique with this sort of that type of backpacking traveling? Like when you have a longer period that you're traveling, there's a greater degree of sense of freedom, in my opinion, because a little bit like we go here, we have now touched down on literally another continent. What are we going to do now? Well, what do we want to do? And are we going to stay here for one more week because we got some new friends and we're going to hang out with them and we're going to go for this? And now we go to the next place. I mean, like it's something special with that type of traveling. Am I summarizing it fairly?
Yes, totally. And I think that goes back to something that you said earlier also, because for me, when I was traveling a lot in like the end before COVID, when I was becoming a bit tired, I also felt that, like you said, that the feeling of traveling was going away, but also the fact that I couldn't prepare for it. So I didn't have, the travels came so close, so I didn't have time to plan for it. And when you have like shorter trips, you want to make sure, if you're just there for a week or a weekend, then you need to make sure that you visit all the stuff you want. But when you go backpacking, then you don't need to have plans because you will have so much time.
And the plans is unfolding, because in a way the plan is to get there, and then let's see what the next plan will be, and opportunistically the plans unfold, which is an amazing.
The plan is to have no plans. Is that what you're saying?
No, you have a plan. I agree, but you have a plan on a macro level.
Meta plan.
Meta plan. Instead of having a plan on I'm going to visit this mosque in 225 in order to have time to go to Disneyland in 226, I'm going to touch down in Sydney and soak in Sydney for a week to really understand what my next step will be. That's a plan, but it's a meta plan.
I guess so. It's nice.
Do you agree?
Yes, I do.
And you stayed there for a year or how long time?
No, just a few months.
A few months.
And then I actually went to Italy to study Italian.
To study the language specifically.
Exactly.
Was that the first experience and encounter with like studying Italian, or had you done it in school before?
No, it was the first. I didn't know a word of Italian when I came there.
How come you went there then?
Yeah, it was kind of a cultural shock, I have to say.
But what was your motivation, so to speak?
It was that I wanted to travel, and I was traveling on my own. And then I thought a few months in Australia is fine, but I don't want to go to Australia alone for a year. But I wanted to travel for a long time. And I thought if I go somewhere to study, then I will meet people and kind of build my own new life. And then studying a language was the easy thing to do.
So it has some. The way I did it was I was after gymnasium, I guess, secondary upper school. I wanted to travel. I had no money, and then someone explained, you can seek CSN loan to study. And then, of course, I wanted to go to Australia to go backpacking and travel, but I enrolled in a university. And then from that as a base, we did traveling like that. So I did my 3 years in Australia studying and a bit of backpacking.
Ah, okay.
So that's how I solved it. But it was. But I understand now. The connection is like, okay, I want to travel, but at the same time, I want to find a base. I want to find a new life, or I think it's good.
Exactly.
Totally understand what that came about. I was thinking that like that.
So you stayed in Italy for some time then, half a year, or what was it?
Half a year.
And do you become? Sorry.
Went back to Sweden then after that, or what happened after that?
I did go to Norway, actually.
Norway?
I went to Oslo, and I became one of these Swedes who work in Oslo. But I didn't stay for long because I just wanted to go back to Italy because I had fallen in love in Italy.
Oh, really?
So I just needed
With the country or some person?
Actually, the country, but also a person.
Oh.
So I went back as an au pair.
Right.
To another, I studied in Florence, but I went back as an au pair outside of Rome.
Nice.
And was there a big difference between the different parts of Italy? I know people, I have friends in Milan, and it's quite clearly a difference between northern Italy and how was it Florence to Rome?
Yes, it's a difference, and also the way that they speak is differently. So and also the behavior, the food, everything is a bit different since it's such a new country.
Oh.
New in what way do you mean?
Italy as a country was founded in 1860s. So compared to many other European countries, it's actually quite.
I don't know my European history here. Where's because Rome is
exactly. That's what I'm thinking as well.
Italy, the modern Italy is founded in the 1860s. Exactly. But what was before then? I don't know my history. I realize.
I'm also thinking, every road leads to Rome. That's what I'm thinking about since the Greeks or something. So.
Yeah, but it's old Italy.
Yeah. Before that, it was just parts. Italy was divided into small parts with, I think, kingdoms, or I don't know what you would call them, but the regions were actually
more autonomous.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the United States of Italy in some way.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Awesome. But then you went in some way or form back to Sweden at some point, or?
Exactly. So then I needed to go back to Sweden to study. So I started university in Sweden, engineering in Uppsala.
Uppsala University. What do you think about Uppsala University as a university?
I think it's a great university, but then again, I don't have that much to compare it to since it was there I went.
I heard a lot about it there. 1st of May kind of celebrations there. That's one of the kind in Sweden, I think.
That was fantastic.
Could you, for someone who doesn't know Uppsala University, what is happening on 1st of May?
Well, actually, it's the day before 1st of May.
Valborg.
Valborg, yes. So it starts with champagne breakfast.
Of course.
And the problematic part is that this is probably the 3rd day that you're partying. So it's not like the champagne, or since you're a student, it's more likely to be cava or prosecco. But it's not like it's going down very easily. So, but you start there, and then you just go on to have going to a park, picnic in a park, outside of the university buildings, and then you go on to have herring's lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Surströmming or no?
And obviously you need to continue then to how to say this in English, but the champagne galop.
Yeah,
I don't know what that is. Actually,
yeah, the champagne gallop
race,
the champagne race.
Exactly. So that is when you go to the Uppsala Nations and you buy a bottle of, once again, not champagne, probably cava or prosecco, and then you just spray it all over, and you drink some of it, or you buy 2 bottles and you drink one and you spray the other one. And after
right.
Exactly. And after that, I mean, people continue, but after that, I'm always done with drinking alcohol. So after that, I've always been drinking water.
But and this is, of course, Uppsala is one of the older, greater universities in Sweden, and this tradition is, I guess, quite old, and it's literally the whole university, or if not the whole town, participating.
Yes.
So
yes.
it's a festive situation.
Yes, and students from other parts of Sweden
joins in.
Also joins, yeah.
I heard other students coming up to Uppsala just because of their Valborg celebrations. But still, you went there to study. What did you study at that time?
Socio-technical systems engineering.
Socio-technical systems engineering.
Yes. Exactly.
Can you explain or elaborate more on that?
Yes. So it's more or less it's about studying both the technical part of technical solutions, but also to keep in mind like the more human part of solutions or technical solutions. So when we were studying complex systems, for example, and always focusing on both what could go wrong, for example, from a technical point of view, but also from the human interaction. Yeah.
I guess it's similar to AI. I mean, we really want to use AI together with humans, right? Human in the loop kind of situation, right?
Exactly.
But so of course, that field of studies, is it getting more relevant or less relevant as the technology evolves?
I would say that it is very relevant.
I would say so too.
Yeah. So,
awesome.
what we were studying was a lot of obviously math, since it's engineering, but also statistics, modeling.
And how do you pick up on these social or human dimensions, the softer dimensions in an engineering? What type of classes do you do then?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we had like human-centered system design, for example. We also studied philosophy. We studied also economics. So organization, for example, to understand that part, which is very relevant to companies, obviously.
Is it fair to say that when you have this angle, one dimension, what you're actually thinking and studying, is the contextualization of systems in how they are worked and used and of value? And would that be a fair understanding?
Yeah, that's a really good summary of what it is.
Sounds very relevant.
Awesome. And what happened after the school or after university studies? What was the next step you took in your career?
Yes, so I did really appreciate the machine learning or data mining.
You took some machine learning classes then as well?
Data mining.
Data mining, yes.
And that was super interesting. So I wanted to continue with that. So I was looking for thesis work to write my thesis in a company where I could do this area. And I did find a thesis at Scania, where we did some work that was not really as much data mining as we initially hoped for. It was more databases and stuff like that, but it was very close. And while we were doing this thesis, I did it together with a school friend, and he was very interested in IBM. And he was going to IBM for one of these student meetups. So I just came along. And then, it was time to start looking for jobs. And when we had been at IBM, they had talked a lot about this field. So they talked a lot about...
The field of socio-technical...
data mining.
Data mining,
data science.
Exactly. So that was the reason why I was looking at IBM and applying for their graduate program.
Because you felt they were sort of framing the topics that they were talking about was close to the interesting topics that you had sort of fallen in love with.
Exactly, and that they were focusing a lot within this area, and that was a focus area also for them.
What was their graduate program? Can you just describe what that was?
Yeah, so it was, in my case, the graduate program that I applied for and that I eventually also got was within the software sales organization. So it was as a technical specialist within IBM's software group, as it was called at the time.
And a specific software that you focused on at that time?
Well, I did say at the interview already that I was applying because I wanted to work with data mining. Yeah. So I got to work with IBM's data mining tool at the time, which was called SPSS Modeler. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And what's the how do we frame data mining in relation to data science, or do we have a simple explanation or definition to understand data mining in this context?
Very good question. Data mining, I would say, is kind of a part of what is now described as data science. So it's more narrow than data science. And it's actually a set of different types of algorithms used to mostly do predictions, but also to structure data. I mean, the word data mining comes from that you're trying to mine for information within a large data set.
So not mining bitcoins, but actually mining some kind of useful information.
But it's really
data,
interesting,
right?
because if we follow the trajectory of the industry, we have had different core ideas and even vocabulary to some degree. So when you say data mining, I can almost place it in a year.
Yeah.
when we were talking about data mining. So data mining is a set of data science with a set of algorithms for certain types of use.
Yes.
What is the typical data science problem?
If the question is what data science is that data mining is not, I would say that data science also includes prescriptive analysis. So that is optimization. So not only predicting the future, but also when you have a prediction, optimizing on what a system should do next based on the prediction.
But I was going in a little bit different direction, because data mining has typically, in my understanding, and you are I don't know it as deep, but it is a certain type of algorithms we're using more or less for a certain specific data problem. Like that's what's in a way the cutting edge. What was that time series data? Was it sort of regression type problems, or what was the type of data mining prediction problems?
Yeah, structured data.
Structured data.
Yeah, and also now it starts getting tricky, but I would say that what is now known as deep learning might not be a part of data mining, but this is also where if we start Googling, we would probably
these terms and definitions, right?
Yeah, exactly. We would probably find different definitions. But from my perspective, I would say that data mining would probably not include deep learning, so not the most advanced algorithms which are usually used for unstructured data.
But maybe as a very simple way to go into another angle to understand what does IBM mean with data mining is also to look at the tool set. So the data mining tool number one for many, many years has been SPSS. And then you can have a look at what can you do with SPSS? What problems can you get help from SPSS? So I guess this is a backwards way to understand.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's a term, that has some history, and people switch the terms, but they still mean similar things. So it's more also about like the current fashion, I guess, in terminology.
But this is true, right? Because we need to put data mining, and then, okay, are we now defining data mining in the 2015 context, or do we define data mining in the context of 2022?
Yeah, that's a relevant question, because like you said, from IBM's perspective, we were talking about data mining for a while, but now we're not.
Yeah.
So.
But also SPSS, there's so many different products there as well. The modeler was one, right? But you have, what was it, Statistica or Statistics? And then what was the family of products that they had in SPSS?
Exactly. Statistics is used for more the statistical
regression.
Exactly.
Prediction.
And when you're trying when you're testing a hypothesis, so the classical statistical tests, while data mining is more when you have larger data sets and you might not know what you're looking for, so you're not trying to prove something in particular, you're just trying to understand something, mine for insights.
And this is also an interesting dimension here, that we were, and this was also at the time, in different times, we're exploring our data. We're trying to find new patterns, right? Maybe this is more data mining to some degree. Then I have an hypothesis. I want to validate this problem.
Yeah.
And if I want to do the more exploratory topics in using SPSS, which of the products is more for this?
The more exploratory.
Yeah, if you want to do the mining part, is it more in the statistic or the modeler?
Yeah, that's the modeler.
That's the modeler, right?
But now in 2022, we have other products.
Yes.
I still remember a day of Spotify times where a number of IBM sales people were sitting there trying to sell us modeler and statistics and Watson Analytics and a number of things. And I asked them a simple question about, can you please describe to me when should I use Watson and when should I use SPSS? And they said, they're both useful, they're both good, but for different things.
But you have such a deep portfolio, of course, in IBM.
Yes.
But
if we just try to, how would you describe like Watson Analytics versus SPSS modeler potentially? Do you have any?
Well, Watson Analytics, I can totally do that. I just have to say that that's a product that doesn't really exist per se anymore, but it's part of another product which is called Cognos, Cognos Analytics. So it has kind of emerged into that. But what Watson Analytics was used for was for more, not really data scientists or analysts, like that type of analysts, but it was more used by BI people, like business intelligence people, who are looking at historical data. So while modeler is used to kind of predict the future, Watson Analytics was more to display historical data.
I still remember how rather impressive, demos of Watson Analytics, where you can more or less, input the raw data. It actually then suggests, what type of models to have, versus modeler, you have to know a bit more potentially of this is what I want to do, and here is the data. And it seems to me, and I probably am wrong, but in Watson you can do the opposite. Basically, provide the data, and it suggests, what models to use in some way, and also of course text was a big part there, right?
Yeah, I mean, in Watson Analytics, just like you said, you could get suggestions on what it might be that you're looking for and what you're interested in finding.
Yeah, there's so many different products at IBM.
But this was the first part, right? The graduate program, and
Exactly.
And what's the trajectory from here?
Yeah, so I did. So this program was also we did some education, obviously, because it was a graduate program, and then after 2 years, pretty much, I did change to another role within IBM as a consultant. So then I started to work for what is called IBM's Expert Labs. So that is, we were only working with IBM product portfolio. So we were specialists on IBM software, different types. And in my case, obviously, it was the data science or data mining tools.
Any highlights from that time? Any companies that you work with, or some extra fun times that you can mention?
Well, that was when most of the traveling started.
Oh.
So I did have a lot of interesting projects working with clients in different parts of the world, mostly in Europe, but also outside of Europe. And I did work with companies in a lot of different industries. So I think, I don't know if there's anything in particular that I should mention, but it was a fun time, and it was interesting to see how our products were used and what value you can get out of it.
Because one question could be, I assume now you have used the product for different use cases for different industries. Could you, if you reflect over that, are there some common themes in what type of use cases that was sort of prevalent at the time? What type of problems? If I take it from it might be a different business problem, but when you look at, and then they are different, but then mathematically or what you actually were doing, can you get some, is there a red thread or something you can sort of draw out here?
Yes, I mean, two things based on what you said now. So first of all, it was easy to see that very different business problems could have the same technical solution.
The data problem, the analytical problem underneath.
Exactly.
I mean, it's GPT once again. It's
GPT.
general purpose technology. Statistics and data mining and data science and AI in general can be general purpose, right?
And what were they? What typically can you do some generalization?
I did work on one project, for example, where we predicted traffic accidents where they were going to occur.
Interesting.
So that the police force could send policemen to that area with the hope that the presence of the police would
I thought with the hope that an accident will occur.
No. To prevent, proactive prevention.
Exactly.
Yes. So have a police car here to calm the traffic right here.
Exactly. But then and the other part of your question was a little bit like which kind of business cases were mostly occurring. And I would say that we saw a lot of predictive maintenance examples. So I worked on different predictive maintenance cases for vehicles, for example, understanding which parts of a vehicle that were likely to break before they broke so that they could be replaced without spending a lot of time in the workshops.
Commercial vehicles like trucks and buses, or also more for the commercial use than private consumer cars, or both?
Well, both occurred, but in my case, I worked more on trucks and buses. Yeah. Also, we saw like industries where they wanted to be able to understand when components of their production line before the components broke, they wanted to understand that they were going to break so that they can once again replace them without having to stop the whole production line, which would mean like huge costs.
So planned maintenance over planned over unplanned maintenance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And you worked for a consultant there for a number of years then, or how long did you continue doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think 3.5 years, maybe.
And maybe now this is the time to help us understand a little bit how IBM is organized. So because you have been in a sales organization around products and now you're in the consulting, could you just give us a little bit a view of Great Blue?
Yes. So IBM does both have a consultant organization, and IBM is selling both software, hardware. We are also offering financial services. That is, if someone of our customers or like some other IT companies' customers would need to get a loan to be able to buy products.
Is to finance instead of capex investments over time, financing it.
Exactly. And I guess that is pretty much the different parts of IBM that there is.
The major sort of structural part is finance, products is software and hardware, and then we have the consulting arm.
Exactly.
And within the consulting arm, there is a couple of different areas, like the labs versus the professional services or business services, or how does that work?
Well, actually, when I was working as a consultant, this is when it starts getting tricky, because the type of consultant that I was belonging to the software sales organization. So I never did belong to the pure consulting branch. So I couldn't really tell you exactly which parts there are.
And IBM is such a huge company.
It's such a huge company.
How many? Is it like 300,000 people or something? Or do you know the number these days?
Oh, it's constantly changing. But I know that when I started, it was about 400,000. So like a smaller country.
Perhaps we can get, so that's some number,
270 is the number on Google.
Yeah, and that is also because when I started, we had another part to IBM, which is now known as Kyndryl. So that was a spin-off that left IBM last year.
Interesting. And one of a couple of the very famous moments in IBM's history is the Deep Blue in '97 and Jeopardy in 2011. This is before your time, of course, but do you remember, or did they speak about those moments in any point in time, or do you have any reflections on those?
I speak about them sometimes, obviously, because I think it's we as IBMers, we should be proud of IBM's history and everything that we've accomplished throughout the long history. So
perhaps we should explain it. I mean, I think it's in AI history. These are two of the major pivotal points that we have with Deep Blue and Jeopardy. But how would you describe them? What was Deep Blue's moment versus Kasparov and things like that?
Well, I would rather focus on the later one, Jeopardy, and actually we have later ones as well. But if we focus on Jeopardy, I mean, some of the technology that was used when Watson was used to win Jeopardy or compete in Jeopardy and
win. And win, that's the point.
Exactly. Some of that functionality is actually functionality that is being built into the solutions that we are using and selling today. And what was happening was that Watson was competing against humans, and not any humans, but actually the best Jeopardy players of all time. Since the players are not allowed to use the internet, neither was Watson. So Watson had to be pre-trained. And then Watson had to get to hear the question at the same time as the humans.
Speech to text as well.
Exactly.
Try to understand that.
Exactly. And then try to understand the given question, which was...
Or answer, right?
Or answer even. Right. Yeah, exactly. To understand the text that was given and understand what is it that's...
what was the question?
Yeah.
So there are several components in this feat.
Yeah, and okay, I read a lot about this as well. It's kind of a cool how they just managed to do that. Do you know anything about the underlying hardware and the solution they actually did to be able to beat the grand champion on Jeopardy? They had some big mainframes and things like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I'm not really sure about the hardware since that is not my area of expertise. But it was, if I can add something more, like the next part, when Watson has understood like what might be the answer, then and then searching for the question, then the next part is obviously to understand whether Watson was sure enough to answer,
right?
Because you don't want a computer or a person competing to always respond, since that will
you lose points. You lose points if you answer every time, but you answer wrong.
Exactly. So
the probability of you being wrong is also part of this equation.
Exactly. So that is the last part of the equation.
Yeah. And it's such an interesting thing, and given all the chatbots that we've had since that time, you wish the chatbots was anywhere near the performance of Watson at that time, right?
It's fun that you say that, because our solutions for interactive assistants, as we want to call them, is actually including some of the features that we were using in Watson.
Yeah, now they are.
Now they are.
So let me refresh my memory. When is the Jeopardy challenge? When is
11,
this?
right?
Is it 2011?
And the newer one.
Yeah, which one was that?
Yeah.
That was actually when the project Debater.
Right.
So now I don't remember which year, but I think it was maybe 2019 that we did, like after Jeopardy, IBM was thinking, so what to do next? And the next thing was to create a system that could debate a human being, which is even more difficult than to just find the answer or the question to a question.
I think it was 19, yeah. It's kind of interesting. And Goran here is looking up the debater. So how would you describe, how does a debate work? Was it competitive, like debating, or what was the purpose?
Exactly. So once again, the debater was created to be able to, like different parts actually. It was, in one stage, it was used to help human beings to get ideas of how to proceed a debate.
It's like a supporting system for humans. Then.
Exactly. And then another version, the final version was actually debating one of the world's best debaters. Exactly. And in this case, I'm happy to say that the audience, which was the judge of who was debating the best, did decide that I think they did the 3 debates, and 2 of those were won by the human being, which I have to say is kind of a relief, right?
But yeah, so the dimension of debating, if you unpack that problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more than having the factual answers, right? You have to have the psychology in mind to actually win the debate.
Argument and sort of, how to build an argument. What's the logical chain of an argument?
And to understand the nuances of the language. I think that is a big...
because if you're debating, you even also need to... You have a strategy of what you're going to talk about, but in the debate, ultimately to win, you need to also maneuver and respond in relation to the other's rebuttal.
Yes.
Which is, so you need to navigate.
And also to handle irony, for example, but maybe to understand irony, but...
To win a debate, you need to be doing the right punchlines.
Exactly.
I think this is coming close to, you have this kind of Turing complete kind of things where you can do basically anything compute-wise, but it's another concept called AI complete, which basically is saying that you need the human level intelligence to be able to do something. And I think debating is very close to being AI complete in that way. Because you need all the the background knowledge, and you have to have the reasoning in mind, and you have to have like a deep understanding of
so
what's happening.
if you think about AI definition as human-like intelligence, if you're a fan of that definition, I know you are not.
Yeah, but I think that one of the definitions.
One of the definition is human-like intelligence, and then I think
not human-like, but human level intelligence.
Human level, okay.
I don't like the human-like. That's another thing. But
That's right.
It's on a level of humans, which is very different from AGI, which can be far surpassing the humans.
But from this perspective now, debating is
Human
even
level.
I would argue human-like.
I think an AGI system that is like 100 times better than any human would easily win a debate as well.
Yeah, but
so it's not human-like anymore.
No, an AGI is not human-like, but the intelligence of this AI needs to be human-like.
No, I think it needs to be human level or above.
Okay.
Right?
We can have this.
It can, if it's far surpassing human level, it's still going to win the debate.
Yeah.
Therefore, it doesn't have to be human-like.
And it has to be human level. Okay.
Yes.
This is so interesting. Do you have a definition for AI? If we jump a little bit here, but I think it's a good segue right here, right?
But we need to move into ethics as well. How you got started with that, I think. So we can add that to the list then.
You want to do this in this order, okay? Good.
If that's okay.
It's okay with me.
Sure, and actually that is pretty much where we are in the history right now, because that was part of my interest for this started during one of my projects as a consultant, where we were asked to add some data to the model, which many in the IBM team felt like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do this. Like maybe you shouldn't do everything that you can. So in this case, it was to add ethnicity to predict some sort of minor criminal offenses.
So some kind of project that wanted to predict something, and they added ethnicity as one of the features potentially?
No, actually it wasn't added, but it was considered by the client. And the IBM team was a bit hesitant, and in the end it wasn't added. Of several reasons, but that was kind of where I started to get this interest for this area.
Cool. And what year was this approximately?
Good question. Maybe 2018, 17, something.
And what do you do when you get a deeper interest in an area? How do you start digging into it? How did you do it?
Well, I was lucky since I was working at IBM, and IBM has a lot of research. So I could just read up on what IBM research had done within the area, which was actually, even though it was quite early for this kind of area, IBM research had already done a lot of work within that. So I started, like this problem that I just mentioned was a problem of fairness, right? Because it was like, should we really consider ethnicity? So that was the first angle of AI ethics that I got interested in, fairness.
And how do you do that on IBM then? You worked as a consultant as well. How did you get like closer into the speciality of ethics in AI? Did you change roles somehow? Did you say that this is actually something I'm very interested in, or how did that come about?
Yes, at IBM we get a lot of time to educate ourselves. So I did decide that this was an area that I wanted to become better at and get more knowledge at. So I did study a lot like I said, reading up white papers and stuff like that.
From IBM as well.
From IBM as well. And then communicating that this was an area that I was interested in, which was also, how I kind of could continue with working with this at IBM. And that was also when I swapped to the role that I'm currently having.
Which is, how do you define it? What's the current role?
It is still working within IBM's software sales organization as a technical specialist. And here I am working a lot with IBM's data science portfolio as well as our solutions within ethical AI or trustworthy AI. So we have, for example, one solution that we do offer clients as part of our data platform, which is called Watson Open Scale. And with this kind of solution, we are able to provide functionality that helps explain complex models, for example, because that is something, I don't know if we should talk about that dimension as well, but something that is very important to be able to trust a model is obviously that you understand the way that it's working.
So if we break that apart a bit, before we move into this, because I think this is one of the core topics, of course, that we will talk a lot about, but the Watson term here, it's called Watson Open Scale, and they used Watson for so many different products. What's the thinking there? I mean, of course they want to use it, of course, from the Jeopardy times, etc. But is there something to what Watson means and why they use it for some of their products or not? Or is it just a branding thing? Or when and why do they use the term Watson?
Oh, I don't think that I'm able to answer that question, actually, because I'm in the wrong part of IBM to know what is the reasoning behind the name changes. Yeah.
Okay, but the Watson Open Scale, that's one. Is that the same as the Fairness 360, or is that two different things?
No, that's two different things.
Okay. I mean, should we start with the Open Scale then and try to describe what that is? And explaining models is one thing, but how does it work? Is it a library? Is it a service? Is it more of a consultancy that you can have, or what is Open Scale?
Good question. So that is actually a monitoring system within our data platform. So this means that when you have a model that you use to do some kind of prediction, for example, we were talking about what were we talking about before? Well, let's say healthcare. If you have a healthcare case, or let's say even better that you have a financing case or
defaulting loans. Should you be given a loan or something? Right?
Exactly.
Whatever, something like that. Yes.
And then obviously you want to be able to trust this model that is going to provide you information about which of your bank customers that should be granted a loan or not. And one of the problems that we've seen in the past is that when models are being too complex, then it is a risk that the model is biased. So if I could refer to an example here, I don't know if you guys remember a few years back when Apple Cards unfortunately got some bad publicity in the media due to a model that was being used to decide who would, how large the credit limit on your Apple Card would be.
Right.
Did you?
No, I didn't.
This one I don't know.
But it's about the credit cards basically, and what the credit limits should be for those credit cards. Right?
Exactly, and the problem in this case was that a married couple applied for a card, Apple Card, at the same time, and they they discovered that they did not get the same credit limit, even though they were married and they had a shared economy and they lived in the same place and they had the same age and they were very similar in many ways.
Similar background as well, like similar education and everything, or jobs, or?
Probably not everything was exactly similar, but the things that they thought mattered to, what matters the most for a credit limit is probably your economical stability, right? And they shared that. So they contacted Apple Cards to understand why they got so different, because it was actually not just a small difference, but the wife got 20 times lower credit limit.
20 times? 20 not 20%, but 20 times?
20 times. And the problem here was that Apple Cards it wasn't their model. So this was a service that they had bought. Yeah. So they couldn't really respond to why they got different credit limits. And this is where the media storm started. Because then obviously what people think is, okay, so the gender is probably a problem here. Also because we know that from a statistical point of view, it would make sense, probably. That
but not 20 times, right?
Not, maybe not
even the opposite, that the female has a better credit. Wouldn't surprise me, by the way.
Oh, okay. So you mean that women would get a better credit limit? Why?
No, I was joking. And my argument, in my family, the woman is better with money. Maybe it's opposite in other.
Could, of course, be. But disturbing if the gender, of course, is the true causal factor for it, right?
But what we do know...
I was joking.
Of course. But what we do know is that women still, statistically, earn less than men. So from that point of view, it would make sense that a model that is built upon statistics would give this kind of result.
But if you have the data on the income, that should override a statistic like that, you would argue.
Yes.
If they now have similar incomes, right?
Yes, that's what you could argue.
But I just have to throw in a small, counterpoint here, because I've also been working with these kind of models with and without genders, and a model wouldn't use a gender feature. If you just think from like a decision tree, it's kind of old traditional machine learning kind of thing. They have the information gain that really decides which feature should be in the top of the tree. The feature should be something that is actually discriminative, which is a positive thing, because it can use to decide, should you get a credit or a loan or not.
Yeah, mathematically discriminative.
So, yes, exactly. It should be an information gain, with it. And if the gender has no impact on it, it's not sufficient. Even if 90% of, data set of people that get loans, for example, are male, if that is not caused by the gender, it actually will not be a deciding factor. It has to be a strong correlation between the gender and the actual predictive dependent variable. So I just want to throw in a small thing. So many people mistake this and think just because you have a statistical difference like 60-40, 90-10, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a predictive feature. It can be, and that's really bad. But not just because 90% of men get something or 90% of women get something else is necessarily the cause of it. And machine learning models are more sophisticated than this to decide what features is the most important one. Okay, I just want to add that.
Yes.
But in some cases, the gender is. And that is when you have true bias in a data set. And that is really bad, of course.
Exactly. But I think that is a good point. So in this case, that was the problem was that the model was complex. So it might be more sophisticated than that. But the real problem was that we don't know, because it was I don't know exactly which algorithm that was used, but it was probably some kind of neural net or another black box model, which didn't
Or even,
give
even
any
a gradient
time.
boosting tree can be really hard to understand sometimes. So,
But
Exactly.
so the real problem becomes the problem of explainability.
Exactly. So that's where we're coming back to OpenScale.
Mm.
So this is one of the things that we're trying to help with in OpenScale when you're using these kind of models, because the reason why you're using these kind of complex models is just what you explained, that you want a model that is more clever than just
the
using
simple statistics.
So ultimately what we're talking about here is that sometimes the best performing model might not be the most suitable model for the problem, because the problem requires trust and explainability. And then you can take some of the performance down, make a much simpler model that you then can have much higher explainability.
Simpler. I mean, isn't the important thing that it actually can be explained? Sometimes take some concern with that complexity by itself necessarily is a bad thing. As long as you have explainability, being a super complicated neural network or not, I mean, it's the fact that you need to have explainability, which you can have, I would argue, for even large neural network.
I fully agree with you, but to push you back a little bit here, I think now we are also even talking about the cutting edge of how we need reasoning about AI systems. So, if I look at the sort of trajectory here the last couple of years, we can do these cool models, and we realize we can do cool models. And then basically the society catches up and say, this is interesting. How does it work? And then sort of so the research has moved more and more and more into this topic, and we realize this is how we can do it.
Okay, but let me clarify, and this is your topic, but this is very interesting, and I think it's important to get this right, because it's very dangerous if you say, if I don't fully understand a model, and every neuron in a neural network, how that works, we can't trust it. I think that's a wrong statement to say. It's like saying, if I have a person, Henrik, that I'll allow to make a decision if I should take a loan or not, and you say yes or no, I will not trust you just because I understand every neuron in your head. You have to explain it to me. You have to give some reason why you think I should take a loan or not. And that is how you build trust. And I think that should be the same for an AI model that you do have. So as long as it does provide an explanation, not by understanding every small part, because you can't in a complicated model, but as soon as it does provide some useful explanation, then it's a good thing.
So let's now really use this as a starting point for how do you see that, or do you so it's not our rant, but it's a position statement.
Yes.
And how do you understand? Do you see it the same way? Do you see it in a different way, or?
I would agree in that there are different usages, so not all of them require explainability. I mean, we really need, in this case, when we're talking about who will be granted a loan or not, we do need explainability, because we
and
need.
I think in a lot of cases you need. The only thing is,
Exactly.
It's not. You shouldn't, equate that with complexity.
But let's be really sharp here. What do we mean with explainability? Because I have heard Anders' argument a couple of times. So the real argument here, in my layman's terms, is that I'm not expecting the doctor who gives a recipe to explain the neural path that he took in order to come up with this decision. However, I expect him to be able to tell me which were the discriminant factors in my thinking that put this, and I can explain that to you. So if then the research is now going for the point that, well, you know what, I'm not going to open up the black box and understand the neural path it took, but I will actually ask the algorithm, why did you take, I will ask the algorithm to highlight which discriminant factors that he made the choice on. And is that an explainability? I think in your argument it is.
Yes.
Was that fair?
Yeah, very good. I like it.
I learned. But do you see what I mean? Like, what is truly explainability from AI? Is it, to understand the lineage of the neuron, or is it that we can actually ask the AI to say what they used?
Yeah, it's more of what you described there, that we do understand which factors or which variables that have been getting the result or the prediction that we that we got.
Yeah.
So that is what we would say as explainability. And that, I mean, if we should say or talk about in which cases we do not need explainability, it could be if I, for example, are on one of these maintenance cases and I want to understand how likely it is that a component will break or not. And it doesn't matter to me why the system says that this will break. What is important to me is that will it break or not? Because if it will break, then we will go there and we will replace the part before. So in some cases, well, you might need explainability there as well, because the person who will change the part or the component might say, I don't trust this if I don't know why.
But I really think this is also a maturity curve, because I think explainability will be part of the game, because I can see even the value to understand why something breaks in order to use it for the design of that.
And also trustworthy, I think. And I do agree with it. Some types of systems certainly needs explainability to a higher degree than others, and especially when it comes to high-risk systems, like health, of course. But I remember still, in a super low risk, like recommender systems or Spotify recommending a song, what harm can that cause? But I would argue it's super high requirements on explainability there as well. If someone gets a recommended really Danish rap song,
why do you give me Danish rap?
They are super angry with that, and they also, in a low risk setting, need explainability sometimes. So I think it's more useful than people think to have explainability.
But let me ask both of you now. It's a loaded question. Do we think the way the general discussion in politics and in these areas, are they sharp enough in understanding the distinction on explainability, or are we talking too much about, this is a black box, I need to understand the lineage of the neurons? Or have we yet moved to a little bit more sophisticated conversation like I think we are having right now? What do you think?
The only answer I can give to that is, like, if we look at the European Commission and the guidelines that they released a few years back.
The ethical guidelines. Yes.
Exactly, the ethical guidelines. The way that was done was by including a high-level expert group. So they did have people from with different backgrounds, which did have these discussions. So it wasn't just a group of politicians maybe that didn't really understand the subject, but you really had high-level skilled experts.
Including a Swede called Fredrik Heinz, that was a professor in Linköping University that is very knowledgeable in this as well. So they certainly have.
And what is your take? I mean, and if we move then from this to more like general understanding in corporates or whatever.
I think still there are too many people that do equate explainability with introspection, meaning that they need to understand the model, otherwise you can't trust it. And I think that's a very, very dangerous path to take. Unfortunately, a lot of people still are on that path, and I hope we can educate people to battle.
But if now just to have empathy, why is it easy to fall into that trap, you think?
I think it's the need for control. If you don't understand how something works, and you can't understand how deep learning models work.
So let me put my thesis on this. Yeah. I think we're coming from another coding paradigm, where we're used to the man instructing and writing each, the business rules of each code. So now we're applying that paradigm on something that doesn't work like that.
We can't debug a model as you can code.
No.
So therefore it's much harder to find the reason, the fault why someone was not given a loan, for example.
So it's a little bit like you...
But you can, I would say you can do that. It's just, you need to have the right techniques. So a lot of stuff here, like integrated range and the Shapless values and whatnot, that you can use.
Yeah, but isn't that the bottom line? You're trying to apply an old dogma and old thinking on a new problem, and it doesn't really work. But if the problem statement might be correct, but how you need to address it, you need to then...
Old methods doesn't work. You need to use new methods to have explainability.
That's what I was trying to say. Do you agree? This is we talking now. Sorry for that.
Yeah, but I'm trying to follow here actually, and I'm not really sure that I did.
Let's try to unwrap that a bit more. I think it's an important topic. So, the old style of building systems that potentially is intelligent can be rule-based systems, and you build in, like, in very simple terms, a lot of rules. If this, then that. If that, then that. If some decision is being made, you can actually track the code and follow the rules and say, this is exactly the reason that this system made this decision. You can just, track, backwards in the code to find that place. That you can't do in the same way anymore. You can still do it, but that type of, backtracking through the code doesn't work with machine learning. So therefore, you need to have other techniques, and this is what we mean. You need to use new methods to have explainability of a system, and you can't use old methods like debugging code anymore, because the code is replaced by a model in some part. But then you have other techniques like integrated gradients.
So the bottom line statement: the problem remains, and we want to have the same outcome, but with new techniques comes new methods.
Yes, exactly.
In a way.
And you can still have explainability, and you can still have trust, but you can't use old techniques. That's basically...
That's it.
Yeah. Does it make sense? Or?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. Okay, so OpenScale, it does provide some methods and to help people to do explainability for models, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also to help monitor the model's performance, to understand like when the model needs to be retrained, because we all know that since the models, exactly, model drift. So
what is model drift?
When the model is trained upon data, it does learn the patterns of the data, right? So if we're talking about the loan takers, it's looking at which attributes seem to be important to explain if a person will be able to pay back the loan or not. But if you don't retrain your model and you use the data from the 80s, then probably it won't work very well in 2022. And probably you even have new types of data in your data set, so the model will not be able to understand, because in that time, if you had one of these, large cell phones, the portable ones.
The classic.
Maybe if you had that one, then you were likely to repay your loan. I'm just making things up now. But
today, having a cell phone is not the discriminant determinant.
Exactly. So
everybody has a phone.
My point here is that since the world is changing, the model also needs to change. The model needs to be retrained. And you can see that from its performance, because at some point it will be very lousy at predicting what it's supposed to.
And we have
be.
so many examples of even high stakes models from Google that was put on the market, and they were hit the first couple of months, and then they just deteriorate, and they actually proved completely wrong. So this is a real problem, I guess. Yeah. It happens.
Yeah. So then the model drift is when the model starts decreasing in accuracy, and that is when you need to go in and you need to retrain your model. And with OpenScale, you can get this information about...
you can understand and monitor the performance, and you can start detecting the drift proactively.
Exactly, so that you know when it's time to retrain your model.
Cool. Should we jump into another?
Because this was what's on
OpenScale, right?
OpenScale.
Yes.
And then the other, what's the other name?
Yeah, what is it? Fairness 360?
Fairness 360.
Toolkit, something?
Well, IBM has several toolkits. One of them is AI Fairness 360. Yeah. Another one is AI Explainability 360. And a third one is AI Adversarial Robustness 360.
Ooh.
Nice.
Let's unpack those.
Yeah. Can you go through them?
Really
if you just compare them to each other, what are they trying to help with?
Well, just to explain what we mean by toolkit, in this case, OpenScale is, as I said, a monitoring system that we include in our data platform. Right. So that's something that we sell as a software solution. While the toolkits are something that we have put together and that we have given to
Open source.
This is Toolkits open sourced for everyone to use.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
And there, what IBM has done is that our research lab has thought, in the fairness case, they thought, okay, so what do we need to collect? What kind of models, for example, do you, or algorithms, what kind of algorithms do we have in like the world that could be used to detect bias, data bias, for example?
So they did a scraping or scanning or finding models that helped you detect bias.
Detect, and that's one of the parts. So, and then they thought, so how can we, what more do we need to do? Well, we need to mitigate bias in data sets. So then they found algorithms for mitigating bias in data sets. And then they thought, okay, so how do we ensure that a data set is actually fair? And then you need to think about different metrics that are important to understand fairness, because I mean, what is the definition of fair?
Let's start there.
Yeah. So then they also collected definitions and also included then explanations to these metrics. So this is what is.
So is the idea for the toolkit to be used for other programmers and developers, so they can infuse these algorithms, or they can run these algorithms to get an out, to get a quality assurance perspective on what they're doing, or what's the idea here?
Yeah. So the thought about the toolkits is that anyone who's working with creating, in this case, Python models of different kinds, should be able to use these toolkits to ensure that the
work on those fundamental problems.
Exactly. So it's more or less just a summary of things like, okay, what do you need to think about when it comes to
but it's a great starting point, right? I mean, like, you have one toolkit that you can get a head start on the fairness problem, and then you have another one for your explainability problem.
Yeah.
And basically it's open source because this is so important stuff. So if you build tools, this is useful stuff in order for you to not, reinvent the wheel or search yourself for every.
And what was the 3 different fairness toolkits you had? If you just repeat the names of them.
Well, one was AI Fairness 360, and one was AI Explainability 360, and one was Adversarial Robustness 360.
Right. Can you just go through them a bit quickly? It was fairness, basically what you started to speak about.
Yeah. And so to answer that question, I would like to say, so from IBM's point of view, when we are working with the trustworthy AI and AI ethics, we're kind of working with that from the point of view of 5 different dimensions, and what we usually talk about is when, let's start with how is IBM working with AI ethics. So first of all, we want to ensure that our own products, which include AI, we want to ensure that those are ethical or trustworthy. Yes. And then we want to help others to ensure that models that they are building are ethical or trustworthy. And then how can we do this? Well, what do we mean by trustworthy or ethical? In the technology, from the technology point of view, then IBM says that, well, it needs to be fair, it needs to be explainable, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be robust, and it needs to honor privacy.
So the 5 dimensions is ingrained in this whole mission and the thinking to really put the context. It's easy to throw around ethics, AI ethics, but here we have 5 core dimensions, that are very, I think is quite...
but perhaps we should go through them. FAIR, I mean, if we just try to find a concrete example, I guess FAIR can be age or gender, or how you describe what FAIR is. What does FAIR mean?
Yeah, and this is a large question per se, because as I said, you can define FAIR in several different ways. But okay, so let's try to not go in too deep into this. But normally, what we consider fair is, and when I say we, I mean the Swedish society. Something is fair when we are not making discriminations against age, gender, ethnicity, and so on. Yeah. So when it comes to the problem that can arise, like we said before, like my example with the Apple Cards case, there we had potentially an unfair situation where it was a bias against the female gender. Yeah. Well, we don't know, but it could be the case.
But it's interesting because from a personal point of view, it sounds unfair. So fairness here can then be deeper than, we have the main ones we understand easily, right? The politically correct ones, if I argue like that.
But I also would like to say, I mean, we have some objective. If it's to give a loan, it should be related to somehow the economic stability in some case, and not to these kind of subjective, features. But sometimes if it is about economic factors, if you were to have income, you can potentially argue that income should not be used as a fairness measure because it can be discriminatory. But in some cases, the income is actually a useful metric. So can age, so can gender, so can potentially ethnicity. I don't see when, but potentially. So it has to be you have to be a bit careful about, what is really the objective, and does a certain feature relate or should they not relate, right?
Exactly. So, and this is the core point of the problem, that you can't really solve. There's not one technical solution to the fairness problem.
But there's not a one fairness definition, because as you just did now,
it depends on the problem.
The fairness needs to be seen in the light of the problem context.
And I actually wrote for IBM has a blog. So in Sweden it's called the IBM Think blog.
IBM Think blog.
And I did write a blog post on the whole topic of how to define fairness. So that is kind of like how deep you can go.
And I was this is the rabbit hole. This is one of the rabbit holes.
And there I was just scraping on the surface. So
but you were exemplifying how intricate this topic really is.
Exactly. How difficult it is to understand what should be defined as fair.
And I guess, as it was said, it's not, you can't simply say these features should never be used or something. It depends, I guess, on the problem and the context in some way, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's also why you have a toolkit and not a one solution to the problem.
Makes
because
sense.
You have to have people, once again, working with different algorithms and using this to understand, like in our business case, in our context, what is fair and how do we ensure fairness?
So would you argue, what I'm getting out of what you're saying now, that in order to work with AI ethics, you need to actually not only apply tools, someone needs to start thinking and take ownership and building a point of view in the context of whatever business you're doing. So it becomes bigger than just apply these tools and you're done. You really need to have someone investing the brain power to sort this out. And that's why toolkits is maybe more appropriate, because you're building someone's repertoire in order to build their point of view and then apply it in their context.
Exactly. And this is also, I would say that this is also a larger problem than that, because what you're describing, I would say, is the work of a data scientist or a group of data scientists. But I would argue that this whole problem is a larger organizational problem. And that is also why IBM is recommending or seeing that in the future we probably need to have a new role in the organization.
We've been speaking about specialization here, but I think an AI ethics role could probably be a new job description in the future, right?
Or if I flip it, where would the AI ethics role report or work into today? Is it in risk? Is it in HR? Is it in...
Or should ethics be part of every kind of role that you have? So it should be a natural component of every kind of role.
Exactly.
Right?
So this is, I was trying to understand that. How do you draw the AI ethics as a matrix view on everything? Do you put it under risk and compliance? Or where do have you had those... I'm sure you got those questions.
I mean, you are a specialist in ethics, so we can see that that's one specific example of a job title like this. Right?
Yeah, and I think, everything can happen from here, but what I would expect is for this to show up on a greater level or like a higher level, so that you have at IBM we have a AI ethics global leader, for example, but it could even be that you get a chief ethics officer.
That would be nice. The CEO with a different term or different meaning, right? Chief ethics officer.
Yeah. But typically, you can have an inflation in C-suite. We know that. But it's quite interesting, because it has some importance. Who does the CEO report to? Is it to the CEO? Or is it no, I was joking. But
let's go through the other 5 dimensions we had there. Fair, we can see how hard it is to just define what that means. So if we try to keep it a bit short, you had another one called explainability.
Yeah, and that one we've talked quite a lot about. Yeah. So that's to understand how the algorithm...
So why a decision or prediction was made.
Yeah, I think that's the summary we were stealing the show a little bit there. Yeah, I like that. But
then transparency, what's the difference between transparency and explainability?
Yes, and that I understood that question would come, because that was a question I asked myself the first time as well. Yeah. And from the IBM definition, what we mean by transparency is more of the transparency of how the model was created. So this is more the governance part. This is about
data collection part and stuff like that.
Exactly. Right? Which data was this trained on? Are there any known limitations with the model? Are there any cases where we know that the model will not work? Or when do we know that it's working? And how was it tested? So more being transparent with what it is used for and how it's working.
Explainability is AI, but how did we go about? How was this used? Or even in the Apple case, who actually made the model?
Yeah,
and the limitations, I guess, of the model.
The limitations, of course.
Yeah. So from just one part. So from IBM's point of view, we are working with something called AI fact sheets, and what that is more of a content declaration, you could say, on the model.
Oh,
so just the
innehållsdeklaration in Swedish.
Exactly.
That should be a law potentially. I'm not very much for regulation,
because I think it's very, very interesting, right? Because if the ultimate game is trust, because even the Swedish report that they did in DIG, right? We realized in the public sector that maybe the one most important determinant factor in order for this to work is trust. And then what builds trust? And then here we have explainability is clearly a component. Fairness is clearly one. But if you think about it, transparency is a huge way to understand. If I understand what you did and you are open with how you did it and humble about how you did it, that builds trust.
Yeah, it's super great. Cool. Transparency, very important as well.
But I don't think it's talked about as, I mean, like we have flipped down in the fairness game, bias game, yada yada yada. Now explainability, but the simple, declaration of content, innehållsförteckningen is quite simple way to build trust, like the fact sheet.
I like it. It's very good.
Really like it.
And also, it's important because, like a data scientist, you can easily then make other people understand like what you've done and not like how this can be used by other people. Otherwise, I felt that I had a lot of responsibility working as a data scientist when someone used the model when I was leaving the project.
Right.
Yeah.
And you left control and you couldn't really control it anymore.
But you actually now let's poke the bear a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
If there's any industry where we should start asking for innehållsförteckning, transparency, is the stupid AI industry that slaps the word AI on everything from mother and his dog. Right? So so actually we should really eat our medicine here. So how many things has not been rebranded overnight to be an AI tool, which is literally, okay, tell me what's the math behind this, please. Let's start here. I think this is actually...
It's very profound, I think.
I think it's profound to talk about transparency, and it is something, it's a medicine this industry needs to eat, I argue.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, totally. Because
so much bullshit going on, to be fair.
all of these terms are very broad and means different things to different people.
And they are being abused as well.
Yeah.
But
consciously,
but
I would
all of a sudden the transparency, I'm getting excited now because I realize how important. Yeah, goosebumps. Look at this, I get goosebumps. This is for real. I get it at least a couple of times because we have so great guests.
Yes.
But the transparency topic is so important because it would be so much more clearer what is the actual math behind your approach. Very simple. And I don't know. I sorry for being a rant there, but I just got. Oh my God, that would solve a bit, I guess, in this industry.
Cool. So fairness, explainability, transparency, and robustness. Then, what does that mean?
Yes. So robustness is more. I would say that's the security part of the solution. So the model needs to be robust, both in the way that we talked about before, that if the model starts drifting, you can't really trust it, right? So that's not really robust. But also you need to understand that no one has tampered with neither the model per se or the data.
And also, I guess, one way I like to say it should be also safe against non-substantial changes in the input. Sometimes, a small change in the input, like the age plus 1 year or something, cause a big change in the output, and that's not being robust anymore. So it should be robust to the small changes in input as well, if you see what I mean, right?
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. And privacy, I guess that's not, or does it even need a
maybe a little bit. So what's the AI point of view with privacy? Are we going down into the AI Act type topics in the EU then, or what do we mean with privacy in IBM?
Yes. So what we mean is that the data obviously needs to be safe, both where it resides, but also so that the model cannot be, so that you cannot send in data and kind of backwards engineer the model to get the data, if you know what I'm saying.
To understand who's behind this recommendation. Okay.
I mean, to extract, private information from the model by reverse engineering it, basically. So,
Yeah.
But maybe now this is maybe I'm going to test something with you. When someone is using AI to manipulate my private thoughts.
Yeah.
So is this part of privacy? So if I'm thinking carefully,
like subliminal messages.
well, I'm
or
like,
what?
so the whole argument that basically, the whole Facebook and the
mass media,
the bubble, right? We're
Filter
talking
bubble.
the filter bubble. So if someone is actively using filtering bubble techniques, let's argue that they exist, right? And let's argue that actually I am actually conveyed over time by a constant hammering to a certain point. Is this a privacy topic that someone is screwing with my head? What do you think?
I'm biting my tongue, but I'm letting Therese answer first.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's in the same ballpark, if this is a different topic altogether.
Yes, well, so I would say that this is totally something that is part of the AI ethics area. So this is totally part of the trustworthy AI. Would IBM label this as privacy? Not sure.
Not sure either. There was a stupid question. It's clearly an
But
ethical
privacy
question.
can be so much simpler, right?
Yeah.
In what you mean. I mean, you want to safeguard your own data and not you have some kind of control and ownership of your personal data in some way, right? Isn't that a simpler way to describe it, or
That's the
what do you
core.
think?
That's the core privacy, maybe.
Well, when you start talking about this really makes me think about the fact that I'm not sure if you read, but China actually has decided to come up with a legislation or regulation, I'm not sure, law, similar to the EU AI Act. And I just read it like a week ago or something. And an important part here in this new Chinese legislation is what you're talking about here, that you should not be, as a user of a system, the system is not allowed to be addictive.
Yeah, exactly. Because manipulation is not only about my thoughts, but it's also the addiction, manipulation that I stay in the system, as an example.
Exactly, and this is something that they cover in this new legislation.
I mean, I think it's really good to be objective here as well, and not only blame China for social scoring and whatnot, but they actually do also work with privacy topics as well, and try to have some protection of their citizen and their personal data, right? And not being addicted and things like this.
Yeah, I think the interesting part here is that EU really has been in the driver's seat within this area, and really wants this area to be important also in other parts of the world. And I have to admit that I was surprised when I saw that China might be the first country to get, I'm not really sure about the terminology here, but a law or regulation or legislation or whatever through, even before the EU manages to.
And they have some other issues with, surveillance societies, etc. But they do care and do have a lot of work with ethics as well in China. And I think it's good to be objective and talk about that as well.
We have so many topics now. Should we stay with IBM, or should we go into one of the rabbit holes with the EU regulation? And because we are sort of we are talking about a subject now that maybe not all our listeners are familiar with, or maybe we should park it and do it later. What do you think, Anders?
Yeah, regulations is so fun to speak.
No, but I think.
No, but I think it could
AI.
one small thing before we move to that,
Yeah,
perhaps.
good.
I think bias as a term is also something I think that is a bit misunderstood, and so many people think, and it would be fun to hear what you think about this, Therese. But bias is not only a bad thing, and I sometimes people say the only solution to fight bias is to make sure that we have 50% of everything. Everyone should be 50% female or male. Everyone should be the average age of a person. Everyone should be the average ethnicity. Everyone should have an average income. And then we have a fair system. I think that's a very dangerous path to take. If we remove all the bias, the data becomes completely useless, and we can't even use it to make any predictions,
And why
AI
is that?
or not.
Why is that, Anders?
I mean, if you don't find any patterns in the data to make a prediction, human or AI, the data is not useful. It is a good bias is necessary to make any prediction that is driven by the data.
But then I think we need to understand what is a mathematical discussion about bias, or, because for me, I think the word bias, for me, I don't understand the word enough to follow you.
Well, if I can
Yes, please.
break in. So when I talk about
Can I break in? I love it.
when I talk
Beautiful.
about this, I tend to call it unwanted bias.
Good.
Because just like you're saying, I mean, statistics is built upon bias.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
we would remove all bias, well, then we can just stop using statistics. And then, I mean, AI, I would argue, is built upon statistics in some ways.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
then AI would not work.
Yeah. Nor would humans that look at the data as well.
No,
If
exactly.
the humans look at
So-
the data, they can't find anything
Okay,
useful.
so now for the ignorant guy, how would we frame bias in a more mathematical, sort of not loaded negative term?
You should have an information gain. It's very simple.
So bias has to do with information gain. Could you explain? Could you guys explain?
I mean, I think if we take the simplest thing, if you flip a coin and it's 50% chance if it will be head or tail, there is no information gain at all in knowing if it will be head or tail. However, if it's a biased coin that has 70% of having head versus 30% on the tail, then there is an information gain in knowing the head or tail. So it's basically the entropy kind of measure that you have, which is very similar to information gain. If there is some kind of discriminatory power behind a certain feature like the head or tail, then it's a useful thing to have to make a decision. Not necessarily bad. It actually became very good to have discriminatory power. If you have no discriminatory power, it's completely useless feature and would never, if you build up a decision tree with machine learning, come up as a node of decision in that tree. So bias is good. Otherwise,
So me,
decision trees wouldn't work.
who's not a mathematician, who hasn't done this properly, professionally like you guys. So bias is a term that highlights the information gain or the
Discriminatory power.
discriminatory power in different features.
Yes.
So
And that can be a good
therefore, bias is is part of the game. However, what we are talking about here, I mean, I have almost forgot one of the words.
Unwanted
is
bias,
the
right?
unwanted bias that Therese said.
Yes.
So what we are now saying, bias in all media. No. You clearly haven't done your math, because everything is bias.
Yes.
It's unwanted bias that you want to talk about.
Exactly.
And I think for me, this is I learned something a little bit more clearer on the term bias right here.
Because when you're looking at the loan, for example, the loan example that we had before, well, you need the data to be. I mean, if it would be any other variable or attribute than gender, if it would have been, for example, amount of money in your bank account that was important into saying whether you got the loan or not, then you wouldn't consider that to be biased, right? Because obviously you think that it's totally fine that the bank says that if you have more money in your bank account, you're allowed to take a greater loan.
So here there is a valuable information gain. There's a discriminatory factor. How much money people have in their bank account, that has a strong correlation to if they're able to pay back on their loans and interests. Simple as that, right?
Yeah.
And it is a bias. It's just a wanted bias.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. I think it's good
But
to
this
just
is important.
talk about these kind
I
of
think
terms.
actually because these terms, we are using them in media and we are talking about them even on stage. And not everybody in the audience is a statistician.
Yeah. Cool. We have like a quarter left, but we have so many interesting societal topics as well. But should we just very, very briefly go through some regulation topics as well? If you want to, if you say I'm completely bored by regulation, then we just skip it.
In the amount of time, maybe. Yeah, it's up to you, Therese, because maybe we have more fun topics.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I think, I don't know. What do you guys think? I think that it is interesting, like we said, that China has now also started to look at this.
This is the scoop today, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And from IBM's perspective, we do. We also had an IBM expert within this.
But is IBM involved in the AI Act? I guess they are. But are you personally involved in that in any way? And
no, personally, I'm not. So the expert that we had representing IBM
was it was part of the expert group, I think, for the. I'm not sure if it was the ethical guide. It was the ethical guidelines. I think IBM had an expert there.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly, yes. And that was our AI ethics global leader who was part of that job. And I would say that you can easily see that from also we talked about before this, we talked about before tonight and this recording, we talked about Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia Dignam. Yes.
Exactly, and she was also a part of that.
Right.
And you can see how different stakeholders like together, their views on what is important for AI ethics and trustworthy AI kind of form the same guidelines that the EU Commission's ethical guidelines are or consist of. So what I'm saying is that you can see that EU has been influenced by these players like IBM or Virginia, but you can also maybe see how IBM and Virginia has been influenced on from this collaboration within the EU Commission.
Should we just, you have spoken about the regulation a number of times before, and if we just focus, I think we can all agree that the regulation is good and it has great intentions and we need to have it. Yep. The question is just, how do you execute that and implement that in a way so it's actually beneficial and not, too harmful for innovation or for economy or for companies that we have and for society in general. Because if you do it in the wrong way, it can actually be hurtful, I would argue, for society as well. And one thing we've said a lot about GDPR, for example, when that was implemented in 2018, was that it had great intentions. One of the intentions was actually to simplify regulations, if I recall correctly. And I would argue that the implementation didn't fulfill that. And I would argue even that it actually had the opposite effect in some way, saying that big companies like IBM or Google or Facebook, they had no problem following the regulation that they provided, about the right to be forgotten or the right to access or whatever, all these kind of rules that you had to abide by. But the small companies did. And that actually became a divide between companies that have the legal power to implement these things and those that don't. Would you agree with that?
Okay, so what you're saying is actually that from the GDPR, it was different on how well you could implement or follow GDPR.
You need to follow a set of regulations to be conformant with GDPR.
Yeah.
Like if someone comes to Spotify and say, remove all the data that is connected to me, it's a super hard thing to do. They have tens of thousands of data sets, and to remove every piece of data in a small part of something that has millions of users in it, it's a super hard thing. They have a really smart way to do it and solve it that way. But not everyone has the power, the technical power to have the infrastructure to be able to abide by right to erasure, right to be forgotten, or right to access. Give me everything you have about me. That's super hard to do. And if you can't comply with that, you can suffer 4% or 20 million euros in fines.
Yeah.
And then I know that some companies have chosen to not take that risk and instead stop using AI.
Yeah.
And that's really dangerous, right?
Yeah. So what you're saying is that maybe the regulation is prohibiting like small actors.
Yeah.
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 And
it's causing an increase in divide between the big players and the normal or small players, I would argue.
And here basically it's I mean, like, we have had this conversation a lot, right? And I think the main conclusion so far, and let's test it with you, Therese, is that intentions are good, but it's sort of how to execute on it, or how to translate something that becomes fairly operatable, given that the landscape of how data savvy we are and what type of platforms we use. For some people, the tech giants, it's way their tech stack has already sorted this out for other purposes, so to speak. So here's the topic, right? How to sort of make something have the right teeth, so to speak, but in the right way, not be hurtful or sort of. Do you follow?
No, not really.
Simply, we want to preserve privacy.
Yeah.
That's an easy thing.
Yeah.
It's simple thing to say. We want to simplify regulation, right?
Yeah.
This is basically one of the core messages of GDPR. But in reality, what turned out is that it was not a simplification. It actually, it was a lot of unsecurity
and clarity,
of how to implement this.
How to implement, how to execute.
This caused instead of a divide between companies that have a very strong tech stack and infrastructure and legal resources to those that don't. So instead, it actually promoted the tech giants, which was not the intention of GDPR. And that's not good, right?
No, I mean, if that is the case, then I would agree that is not good, because that was not the intention with the GDPR.
Well, let's hope that AI Act, that whenever, if ever, it will be enacted, we'll have some clear guidelines at least of how to actually implement this, right?
And maybe a last question here for me to follow. We are talking about the AI ethics guidelines, and now we have the AI Act. These are two different things, right? Or is it the same?
No,
Yes.
no, it's a legislation being promoted.
The one is legislation being up for a draft and promotion, and the AI ethics guidelines is guidelines.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. It's just, yeah.
So there are two different documents.
Yeah, and I think the AI Act is a directive, and GDPR was actually a regulation, which are two different things. So regulation is mandatory, and directive is something that states can implement. But yeah, it's a legislation coming up in some way. Okay,
cool.
Should we leave?
I think we leave it.
Yeah.
It's so difficult.
It's not suitable for an after work to speak about regulations.
No.
Cool. Should we move a bit more into philosophical and societal topics? And I think if we start with some simple question, perhaps, or not simple, but simple to phrase the question, hard to answer. Some people are scared about AI. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think an important part is something that we have discussed earlier today, and that is people don't really understand how it's working.
Right.
So, and if you don't understand something, then it
You get
tends
scared
to
of
be
it.
scary.
Yeah.
And also, since we might have seen quite a lot of publicity in the media, for example,
Terminator.
media storms, and also movies,
Hollywood.
Yeah. So it's kind of, I think that is also an important factor why people are afraid about.
Are you afraid about AI?
Not AI per se, but obviously I can see concerning ways that it's been used.
And abused, perhaps?
Abused, yeah. Just like you were saying here before, like I don't know about you guys, but I can be become quite addicted to Instagram. So I'm just sitting there, and it's so wonderful because it's always showing like pictures that I want to see, right? And this kind of time waste is an example of how we can get trapped in a digital world rather than just live.
A metaverse even.
Yes.
We should go there. Yeah. Okay, but in general, if we ask a question or rephrase it like this, then there are certainly ways to abuse AI, but there are also potentially positive gains. Would you say you're more an optimistic side of things, that you believe AI will bring more good than bad to the society?
Yes. I think otherwise I wouldn't really have this job if I didn't really appreciate the potential with this kind of technology and this. So I would say yes. The gains of AI or data science are great. So we could actually do a lot of good and innovation in the world.
And how do you understand the potential of AI? How do you think it's going to impact?
I think if I would say like areas where I think that it can do a lot of good and where it could do a lot of good, obviously healthcare, but also I think IBM has a collaboration with the Vatican called Rome Call for Action. So it's IBM, it's Microsoft, and a few others that, together with the Vatican, has created this document, the Rome Call for Action, to help. And this is also a part of the trustworthy, ethical AI, to help this kind of technology to be available also not only to the tech giants who can afford it, but also to people who cannot afford it. So make it democratize.
Democratize.
And then what we've seen there is, or what I wanted to say there is that we've seen in one of the collaborations that we've done, AI has been used to fight world hunger, especially, or this was implemented after COVID, when it's got even more difficult in some parts of the world with farming and selling your crops and stuff like that. So what we've seen from there is that AI has been used to help farmers to make the agriculture more sustainable, to help with the logistics, to make sure that less food goes to waste, for example, and also to help preserve the crops by protecting it from pesticides, for example.
But let me reframe it a little bit. So we have had 100 years of technical innovation, right? So technical innovation is happening, and we have different technologies. But once in a while, we have some fundamental, game changers or paradigm shifts or whatever you want to call it. And do we think AI is something more than just any innovation? Is it really a game changer in some ways? And why is it that?
So what you're actually
asking
is it a revolution?
Yeah, do we have an AI revolution that we are not really realizing, but it's actually in the making?
If it's not part of the kind of internet IT revolution that I would argue that started in the 80s or 90s, maybe even. Yeah,
so is it part of it, or is it something on its own?
Exactly, that is the question. Because obviously I think it is a revolution.
That's going on, right?
Is it part of that, or is it like
deeper
by
and bigger.
itself a revolution. Well, too early to tell, I think.
I have a very clear point of view on that.
Yeah, me as well.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I can start. I just like to quote, AIAW, the professor in economy that now turned into an AI professor. But he wrote a book called The Prediction Machines, and he compared the AI revolution to other disruptions that happened throughout time. So, for one, is the transistor in the 50s that led to the computers that we all have and use today. It changed the type of jobs we had at that time and created new type of jobs. We said the internet. It's been around for a time, but didn't really become really popular until the mid-90s with the web. But it also changed the job that we had and created new type of jobs we've never seen before. And he says now, which AI, which also been around for a long time, but didn't really become as popular and powerful until the mid-2010-ish, also would cause a disruption and create, change the jobs we have and new jobs, type of jobs we've never seen before. And he says that the AI disruption will be bigger than the internet and the transistor revolution that we've seen.
Oh, really?
And this is my take on it. When I try to explain why I think AI is something to pay attention to, that people don't really understand how far it will go. So in my simple picture, for me, the Industrial Revolution represent a huge paradigm shift when we do automation of muscle power. So we realize how we can have machines automating how we build stuff, muscle power. And with algorithms and data and moving into decision making, we are now getting the opportunity to automate more knowledge-intensive processes. So from being able to automate simple processes, RPA or whatever, all of a sudden now.
You had to say RPA as well.
No, whatever, right? Like stupid simple processes that we could put simple rules on, right? Now we get into more knowledge-intensive processes, and we can get a hold of more data-intensive processes, and then the imagination is the limit, right? Because all of a sudden now we're into the paradigm of automating brain power. So ultimately, what does that mean when we automate and optimize brain power? Then to me it means you will have data and algorithms in different ways supporting or reinventing every single process in universe that we know, in terms of what you do for work, what you do for leisure, and stuff like that. Now that change in power, I don't think simply the digital. Like the internet and all that has huge power, but it is not in reframing how work is done. Data and AI is reframing how work is done in the same way as the factory was reframing how work is done for muscle power. So this is, to me, how I'm trying to simplify automation of brain power. Yep, that will be big.
It will be big, I think. Can easy. Okay, let me try to find some closing discussion on this and bring it back to AI ethics as well. And one of the problems there, when we start to automate the brain power, as you say, is that we need to have some value alignment. And this is a term that's often used. It's the value alignment between humans and machines. If we have a self-driving car that have, making decisions that is not in alignment with what our values are, it can be some problems with that. And of course, in any kind of other automated system as well. So that, I think, brings it back of the importance of AI ethics. How can we assure that we have a value alignment so we can live in harmony with machines and AI? Do you think this is a field that will... A bit leading question, sorry. Is this a field that will increase in importance, and that is the way to find a solution to the value alignment problem? Do you think so, Therese?
So it depends on when you speak about the value alignment. Is it between like the human and the system, you mean? Or do you mean like... when we talk about the car, like you obviously might have different values in different part of the world. So is that what you're talking about? Or the cultural changes or differences?
Yes, okay, I have to unpack it a bit more. And there are so many great people that speak about this, but you're correct. Values differs between people, cultures, ages, gender, so many things. There is not a single value that rule them all, so to speak. So how do we do that? How can we make a system that is aligned then, if we don't have a single value system in place? And I think, once again, you can think about, okay, should we use a rule-based system to define, this is the rule, you should hit the dog before you hit the human. That's a rule, hard-coded rule we can put in the self-driving car. Is that the right way to do it? You should hit a 90-year-old person before a 5-year-old person. That could be a rule that we put into a system. Is that the right way to do it? Nah, probably not. The value system that we need to build is a super complicated thing. How do we solve complicated problems when we can't manually encode the rules? We use data. And once again, I'd like to quote Jan LeCun here. He says basically, this is not a new problem. We have been designing values for thousands of years. This is why we have laws in our society. This is how we define what is right and wrong in some way. If we can do the same, so we can apply that for machines as well, we will have some kind of value alignment. But it's not by trying to encode a few simplistic rules. It's about automating that process. It's about using data to fulfill the rules that we have in the society already today. I think that's the right way. Sorry for ranting here a bit. But
it wasn't a question anymore, it was a rant.
Yes. But do you see one point? It is super hard, as you say, and super hard problems is not solved by hard coding rules. You can't do that. But we know we can, because we see the system and society that we have today, perhaps not the last couple of weeks, but still, anyway, most of the society that we have is working surprisingly well and has been improving in quality for thousands of years. So we know how to use rules or laws, regulation or policies or values to improve our society. This is not a new problem, and we simply need to have systems that can learn to do the same. And I think machine learning is a very important solution to that problem.
Yeah, and I think when in the situation that you're describing, it becomes very important, all of the factors that we talked about earlier when we talked about transparency, for example.
Exactly.
Like
the 5 dimensions that you mentioned is perfect.
Explainability, fairness. Yeah. Because all of those become very important when to understand, like, how was the system built? Since we might have different data or different, cultural differences in different parts of the world.
It needs to contextualize, it needs to understand so many more things than small, simple rules. Then you need to have a system that can automatically from data learn, as humans do.
And you need to have thought about before, what is your fairness definition, for example? Yes. What is fair to, I don't remember what you said, but to hit the car, hit the old woman or hit the small child.
Yeah, exactly.
What is fair?
Cool. But I think AI ethics is super important. I think explainability and transparency, as we mentioned, is one of the core things that we need to focus so much more, and we're not doing sufficiently. But with people like you, I think we are in a good way to a better society that can be more ethical in the use of AI. Right?
One last question. What would you say is a good tip, starting point for if someone listening or start going, we should probably look more into this? Where do you start?
Well, it depends really where this person or where this organization is at. Because I could say, for example, have a look at the toolkits that we just talked about. But that is if this is an organization or a company which has already today started with AI. So haven't you started with AI at all, then it's good that you think about the ethics part, but you probably need to think about your use case first and understand which type of ethical issues you might need to consider.
I think this is the very, very simplest, best tip. the AI ethics journey starts with your use case. And then with your use case, your product, and then, and then basically earlier think about proactively what the ethical dimensions could be, and when you go into it.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Very good.
Therese, what's next in your life? What's happening coming months to you personally, professionally, or something else?
Yes, so the next coming months. Well, I will not be working for that long because I am pregnant, so I will
Congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you. So I will hopefully go on parental leave this summer.
And you have to apply some kind of value alignment with your kid instead of the AI system at that time.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Decoder.
Oh, wow, that's a big what's coming up.
Yes.
That's one of the best.
Awesome. Yeah, I can see that as a big thing coming up in your life that will occupy a lot of thinking. And you have to study now a bit, right, for that? Or what were you saying before?
Yeah, exactly. There's so much that you need to study. You're recommended to read books and listen to podcasts.
Or not. Or not.
Yeah, I'm always happy when parents tell me that actually we didn't.
But because I think you can get overwhelmed by, the information overload.
Yes.
And I bet you can go out and find the book. If you think there's different ways to do things, you can find a book that supports whatever thing you think is right.
Perhaps it will be a book about ethical parenting or something. Therese soon or something. Who knows?
Exactly.
Ethical parenting maybe is good for AI, right? You're training the AI.
Anyone that you would recommend to come on this podcast? Someone you like to listen to here?
Yeah, I would say that if we start with the area that I think would be interesting,
yes.
I think AI within security would be interesting. I'm
like
not sure.
Cybersecurity or what type of security?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So I'm not
We've
sure.
We've talked about that quite a bit.
Yeah.
So that's,
You have?
No, we have said that AI security is a topic.
Yeah, we haven't had it on the show.
We haven't have a
So
real AI security person. Like people have been knowledgeable, but not someone who is sort of deep in that field.
Yeah, and we should certainly have that, especially in these times. So yeah, great.
And I'm not really sure, like, if who is the right person. But I did attend a few days ago. I did attend a webinar, which was given by I think he was a professor at the Örebro University, and he was called like Alberto. What was his name? Alberto Giacometti? No, Giaretta. Alberto Giaretta.
Please come back with us with a name. So it will be great. That sounds awesome. It's a topic that we certainly should cover more, I think. Awesome. Therese, it's been a true pleasure to have you here. And of course, a lot of topics that we didn't cover, but I think we covered the most important ones.
Yeah, we did. I think we got to a really good conversation this time about AI ethics, and I really like when you start with 5 dimensions like that, or
that's one
really,
of the core.
really good, because then we have a framework, and then we could go. So that was really helpful. Thank you for that, Therese.
Thank you very much, Therese.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for me as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.